Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Dean Dr. Philip Osteen and the University of Utah College of Social Work, we'd like to welcome you to today's Social Work Beyond the Classroom presentation. I'm Dr. Jason Castillo, Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at the University of Utah College of Social Work. This series is a chance to spotlight how our faculty bring their commitments to our students and to our community from the classroom into agencies and neighborhoods. Whether you're joining us live or watching the recording later, we're grateful to have you with us. I also want to thank those who made a donation during registration. Your support of the James C. and Lucille P. Hunter Scholarship helps students who are passionate about international, immigrant, and refugee issues pursue their education fieldwork with fewer financial barriers. If you didn't get a chance to donate and would like to, Janae will drop a link in the chat. Thank you for supporting our students. With that, I'm honored to introduce my colleague, Clinical Associate Professor Yvette Romero Coronado, a bilingual and bicultural clinical social worker and educator and community advocate. Professor Romero Coronado brings over 15 years of experience in trauma-informed care and culturally responsive mental health services. Her work integrates Latine, epistemologies, and traditional Mesoamerican healing practices into clinical practice and educational spaces. She'll share insights into migration factors affecting mental health, introduce a migration-centered assessment framework, and offer culturally sustaining practices for clinicians and communities. Following her presentation, Professor Romero Coronado will have about 10 minutes for the audience questions. Throughout the presentation, please use the QA button at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit any questions you might have. With that, Professor Romero Coronado, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Castillo. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Can you see my screen, Jason?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Again, my name is Yvette Romero Coronado. I am the daughter of Ana and Ignacio and the granddaughter of Lupe and Antonio. This body of work is possible thanks to my elders and to other people's elders who have graciously cared for, corrected, and guided me to this moment. I also want to acknowledge the many clients and community members that have shaped my practice and cosmovision or my understanding of the world and the work. I do this work to honor my ancestors from Mesoamerica and the Iberian Peninsula in the spirit of reclaiming ancestral knowledge and making amends on behalf of others so that I can become a good ancestor myself. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this university and the state of Utah occupy the ancestral and enduring lands of the Northwestern Shoshone Ute, Paiute, Goshute, and Navajo nations. These lands continue to carry their stories of resilience and stand witness to their fight for sovereignty. As social workers, researchers, and community members, we're obligated to past, present, and future Indigenous communities and to hold ourselves accountable to the hopes and needs of Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Indigenous peoples. It is also important to mention this because as we discuss migration and immigration policy, we must acknowledge that the shaping of the immigrant experience and this discourse are happening within the territories of these nations and parallel to the struggles for Indigenous sovereignty. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that this topic is deeply personal for many, myself included, and may tap into stories that live in us. I invite you to take good care of yourself during this presentation. As we sit with these stories and these truths, I invite you to hold these sentiments together. I mentioned that I'm doing this work in honor of my elders, and this presentation would not honor my abuelita and abuelito, my grandparents, if I didn't say that we are more than our wounds. We are also their gifts, their wisdom, and their medicine of all of our ancestors. Second, this community is not a monolith, and the presentation is, of course, not exhaustive. The colonial, racialized, minoritized, and politicized experiences of people from North, Central, and South America are complex and layered. Each person has a unique migration story and faces different immigration policies depending on the country of origin and circumstances. So I invite us all to be culturally aware, humble, and just by uplifting the voices and experiences of the clients in front of us first and always. A little disclaimer. While this is intended to support your work with immigrants, likely most of whom are Spanish speaking in the Latina community and some who are Indigenous language speakers, the presentation is primarily in English with a sprinkling of Spanish words, as well as grounded and narrative-based approaches in the way that I'm talking about things, and you'll see that. I hope the discussion and practice suggestions will be a starting place or a place of affirmation for many of us who have been learning and adapting our practice along the way. I invite each of you to adapt it to your spoken languages and for your clients. So, la plática de hoy, or today's talk, we will focus on practical strategies to engage, assess, and heal through a migration-centered framework when working with Latina immigrants, starting with telling the story of the population size and places of origin, followed by giving you the Eagle to Xoloitzcuintli eye view, meaning we're going to go from macro to meso to micro, or our person and environment analysis. And for those of you who don't know who the Xoloitzcuintli is, it's known as the Mexican hairless dog, who is a good companion to humans. So the metaphor is used to describe the micro condition. So we're using the eagle eye to go high above, and the Xoloitzcuintli to talk about the micro conditions as it would be seen at the Xoloitzcuintli, or Xolo for short, eye level. I will have an interactive exercise when we get to the microanalysis, so please stay tuned. Then I will get into how to approach the work centering migration as an important assessment factor through the MECA framework developed by Dr. Celia Falikov. Lastly, we'll discuss culturally grounded approaches for promoting healing with individuals, families, and communities, and of course, the Q&A. So Latina, Latinx folks on Turtle Island. And here I'm using Turtle Island as it's the word to describe, it's the creation story among many North American Indigenous peoples, referring to North America. Latina, the Latina community is the largest minoritized group in the US. It is estimated that our community is made up of about 64 million individuals, which is the equivalent of 19% of the country's total population. Among those 64 million, the majority is original to Mexico, followed by Puerto Rico, then El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. The majority is concentrated in California, Texas, Florida, New York, Arizona, Illinois, New Jersey, Colorado, Georgia, and New Mexico. The fastest growing communities are from original to Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, and Guatemala. And an important detail here is that in 2021, we found that 81% of Hispanic and Latina identified individuals were US citizens, and immigrants were found to be a declining share of the US population. Bringing it close to home, in Utah, 500,000 residents identify as Hispanic or Latino, making it the second largest racial and ethnic group, accounting for more than 15% of the total population. The majority call home cities like West Valley, Salt Lake City, and Ogden. Of those 500,000 individuals, 35.8, so roughly 36%, are children and adolescents. The immigrant community is nearly 300,000 strong, representing approximately 9% of the total Utah population. In a report published in 2020, it was estimated that Utah's 79,000 undocumented residents live in about 39,000 separate households, and that 1 in 3 immigrants in Utah are undocumented. So, Let's take a person and environment approach, and let's discuss the eagle eye view first, or the macro. In January of this year, the Trump administration rescinded the protected areas policy, which protected certain areas such as churches, schools, and hospitals from immigration enforcement, replacing it with an unreleased directive that gives ICE agents power to take enforcement actions in any of those spaces. Soon after, Congress passed Senate Bill 5, the Laken-Riley Act, which requires the Department of Homeland Security to, and I quote, detain certain non-US nationals who have been arrested for burglary, theft, larceny, and shoplifting, end quote. We also see the signing of 287G agreements across the nation, which establish a collaboration between law enforcement and immigration custom enforcement officials. We have 16 of those signed throughout the state of Utah. In September of this year, in the case of Noam versus Vasquez Perdomo, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling lifted a lower court's temporary ban on certain ICE tactics, effectively giving the agency ICE, the authority to consider factors such as appearance, the language people speak, and where they work when conducting immigration stops. This also comes along with the firing of 17 immigration judges. In Utah, we recently went from 6 to 3, although I believe that one of them retired, and it didn't have anything to do with firing. Those firings of immigration judges have resulted in persons being held in detention longer and an increased risk of deportation. Another Utah-specific policy of relevance here is House Bill 226, criminal amendments, which was passed during the 2025 legislative session, which increased the maximum penalty for certain misdemeanors from 364 to 365 days, triggering automatic deportation under federal law. This is happening at the eagle eye view, in addition to the demonization of immigrants in political rhetoric. That is a lot. If your corazón, your heart, and nervous system are activated, I invite you to slow it down by taking 3 mindful breaths, inhaling and exhaling through your nose, and I will join you. Good, one more. Thank you for taking care of yourself. Now let's talk about the state of the collective, or mezzo, through the experience of children. I find that it paints us a picture of how we're doing and the risks of immigration-related childhood adverse experiences that are felt throughout the lifespan by entire families, communities, and institutions of care. And likely the people who will walk into your office one day as adults, seeking what some refer to as formal care. Valdez and colleagues found that in the past decade, remember that part, 5.2 million children in the US, 85% of whom are US citizens, live with at least one immigrant parent with unauthorized status. This means undocumented. Thus, a large number of children live with the possibility that a parent or a family member with unauthorized status in the US could be detained or deported. This experience involves an ongoing threat to a child's sense of safety, which in turn is linked to anxiety and depression in youth and suicidal ideation as well. The National Center on Hispanic Children and Families report that 1/4, so 25% of all Hispanic children, in quote, live in doubled-up households, according to the analysis of the 2023 American Community Survey data. And double-up households are defined as those in which children live in households with their parents, as well as other adults like elders and relatives, aunts, uncles, maybe even some that are unrelated. In Utah specifically, it is estimated that 41,500 children live with one undocumented parent. So that's about 4% of children. Also in Utah, about 181,400 US-born residents live with at least one immigrant parent. And if you see here the numbers of arrests, detentions, and deportations according to ICE, and consider how those are impacting children, families, and entire communities and systems of care, it paints a picture. Okay, now let's talk about the Xoloescuintli's view. So the Xolo's view, the canine companion, to look into what's happening at the individual level. Here's where I invite your expertise and observations. So please scan the QR code and answer the following questions. I want you to know that I'm using a free version of the software, and so it will only allow 48 of you to participate, and I'm sorry about that. So please scan the QR code and bear with me as I stop the share with the PowerPoint and go into the Mentimeter. So please start to enter your answers to this question. What behaviors, emotions, beliefs, and navigation strategies are you observing in the Latinx immigrant community in reaction and response to the macro and meso factors that I just mentioned or that are at play? I'm going to stop the share. And the answers are coming in. Thank you all. I see the ones that are standing out: fear, anger, anxiety, isolation, sadness, panic, resignation, community, hiding, resilience. My screen share might be paused. There we go. Yes, and right, you obviously are listing a host of different navigation strategies, some that are steeped in survivalism and others in value-based living, ranging from adopting the dominant culture, maybe to resisting, and for some in the long term, we see behaviors, patterns, beliefs, and strategies that are probably the result of previous separations and migration traumas. And remember, I asked you to remember earlier that we said that in the last decade, 85% of US-born Latina individuals have lived with one undocumented parent. So we're talking about several generations now that have been living with the uncertainty and the fear of separations, arrests, and deportation. And that can impact the person in significant ways. So thank you for your participation here. I'm going to go back to my slides. You know, in a lot of what you all were sharing, it makes me think of a quote by Resmaa Menakem, the author of My Grandmother's Hands, that says, "Trauma decontextualized in a person, it looks like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. And trauma decontextualized in people looks like culture." And I'm often curious when I'm meeting with immigrant clients and their children, how much of what they're presenting with really is and how much of how they exist has been impacted by traumas. And maybe they don't talk about it in that way, and that's all right. But these are important things to consider. And so again, if your corazón, your heart, and your nervous system are activated, I invite you to slow it down by taking 3 mindful breaths, inhaling and exhaling through your nose, and I will join you. Good. Let's go for one more. Okay. So migration competency, what does that mean? I'm going to give you 2 definitions. It's really the ability of individuals and systems to provide respectful, effective, and quality care to refugees and migrants, considering the unique life experiences. For today, I'm describing it as a comprehensive understanding of migration experiences and the obstacles migrants face pre, during, and post migration. This includes, but is not limited to, understanding, of course, the impacts of migration and immigration policies on individuals, families, and communities across the lifespan and generations. Give me one second while I take a sip of water. What we know is needed to provide culturally attuned and humble care when it comes to Spanish-speaking immigrant communities are that we must practice holding 3 things in place: having knowledge and understanding of cultures, having language skills, and reflexive skills. So before we look at the assessment model, I want to touch on best practices related to engagement, given the context that this community is navigating. Acompañamiento, or engagement as a practitioner. Acompañamiento in Spanish means to literally accompany someone. That is the aim of our work, and these are some of the best practices when working with this community. First and foremost, it is important that each of us understand our beliefs, feelings, and experiences related to migration and how those filter into our work. Next, we consider the system that we work in, and we need to ask ourselves, how am I communicating that we, the agency, right, are a space that understands or cares about them and their community? This can include, right, language that you use to decor or how you market, where, and what you offer. Given, the many needs in this community, it's helpful to have flyers or materials that direct immigrants to resources. Staying informed about local, national policy and organizing efforts, including chismes, right, is like just like the whisperings, the rumors and things that are being talked about in the community. Those are really important to keep an ear out to. And I know that it's a lot of information, so when staying informed, it's important to also practice having a good balance and good boundaries around that, but it's important to know what's going on. And here's something that I think is critical in this, outside of like being reflexive, outside of thinking about access, it's about safety. So be thorough when it comes to informed consent. So when discussing limits of confidentiality, let them know that it's also confidential when it comes to talking about immigration status, that will not be shared with law enforcement or any other agency or documented in your clinical note that way. There are other ways to document challenges related to systems and structures that do not involve specifically saying that your client isn't documented in your system. So make sure that your client knows that you are not going to document that in your EHR system, that is going to be kept confidential. And then also talk with them about how you're going to navigate mandated reporter duties. So when it comes to interacting with DCFS, law enforcement, or even courts, if you're working on an immigration evaluation, you're going to want to be really, really clear on what happens with your mandated reporter duties, right? It's like, so does that mean that, right, it's like you tell them up front, if you share with me, right, the abuse or the of a child, an elderly person, etc., I'm going to, at that point, right, I'm mandated to contact law enforcement. You're going to want to be really clear about those kind of things when you're working with the immigrant population, because it might not just be them. It might be that somebody in their family is undocumented and the struggles they're going through are relevant to how they're presenting in your office, but they don't want to tell you because they worry that you might share that information. You want to reassure them that that falls under limits of confidentiality, and then how you're going to navigate if and when you have to leverage your mandated reporter duties. In the process, right, you want to reiterate often that they have the right to risk or to pass when you ask them questions, especially when you ask them about topics that are sensitive, like immigration status and migration. Give them lots of permission for impromptu life events. I've had more cancellations and rescheduling requests in the last little bit. So giving some grace, giving some permission for those kind of things feels really important in this time. And these are some suggestions for practicing cultural humility and responsivity in the relationship from the first interaction forward. Now let's get into the assessment. So moving on to assessment, in my experience, talking about someone's migration and immigration experience has not been a central idea when it comes to assessment. Yet I've seen how those experiences and factors can truly be the root of a person's unwellness. So we're putting it front and center today. Dr. Celia Falikoff, a family therapist, proposed the multicultural ecological comparative approach to address the complex issues of cultural diversity and power inequality in clinical encounters. Dr. Celia Falikoff developed this approach to help clinicians practice in a way that is culturally aware, humble, and just. The MECA framework for short, and I quote, recognizes the potential complexity of both the families and the therapist's cultural locations and encourages curiosity in the therapeutic conversation rather than a reliance on potentially stereotyped and ethnicity-focused information. As many of you know, cultural competence within the Latinx communities has mainly focused on ethnic traits like familismo or collectivism, personalismo, confianza, trust, the binary of Marianismo and machismo, religiosity, respect, and fatalism. And while those are valuable to consider, we should be careful not to operate in ways that stereotype, but instead foster reflexivity, humility, and acknowledge strengths and resilience. The topics of inquiry for this model are listed here. It's ecological context, migration dislocation, family life cycle, and family organization. For the purpose of today, I'll present all four domains. I'll briefly present all four domains. However, I'll focus on the domain related to migration and dislocations to help us dive deeper into those factors during the assessment. And please note, this is not a training on MECA. If you want to seek additional information and training, you can reach out to Dr. Falikoff and through the Migrant Clinicians Network as well. Okay, here is the model. So as you can see, the ones on the left, and hopefully it's on your left too, deal with structural inequality. So we're looking at experiences of discrimination due to class, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, so the socio-political context. And on the right-hand side, we have factors that deal with cultural diversity. So like cosmovision, worldview, values, etc. And these are some topics of inquiry under each of those domains. So under the domain of ecological context, right, we want to assess and get a picture of what their social supports look like past and present, because of course, we're thinking about pre, during, and post-migration. So social supports past and present, right? Who were the support system back in the homeland or in the previous place, and then who is the support system now? Neighborhoods and safety, what's that like for them? Work, income, and education, religion and faith community, healthcare and traditional care, like if people, leverage allopathic care or ancestral medicine, and then if they have access to that. When it comes to migrations and dislocations, we're looking at relational stress, separations and reunifications due to migration. Motivation for migration, again, the pre, during, and post-trauma, which is what we're going to focus on today. Language proficiency, systemic violence, and cultural identities. Then on the right side, looking at the family life cycle, age-appropriate norms, developmental task, where they're at with all those things, assessing for intergenerational tensions. When you are in a multicultural or a bicultural family, these are present, trust and believe. Meanings of stages and transitions. We want to find out, right, what it is that they expect of people, of themselves as time goes on and at different stages of life. Rituals, religion, and spirituality. Family organization, so looking at who is in their system. Nuclear extended family, whether individualism is more the way that they operate or collectivism. The sense of connectedness or not, right? What hierarchies are they having to navigate, and then different communication styles. So let's get into you know, into the specific ones with migration competency. So pre-migration. Here we're looking at the life of the client in their homeland or their previous location. Factors we want to listen for are, did they experience violence, right, in their previous location? Did they experience war trauma, political persecution, extreme poverty, ecological degradation, right? Their environments, internal displacements, experiences of colonization and settler colonialism, aspirations to the American dream, and historical patterns of migration. Many right, looking back, where migration used to be much more cyclical, there are patterns and that continue to impact just how people move about the world and how they think about meeting their families' needs and all that. So examples that were provided by Dr. Felikov to get at some of this is, asking, when and why did you think about coming to this country? Who had the idea for migration? How many family members came with you? How many stayed back? And who, right? What were your hopes in coming to the new country? And did you know anyone who had already come to the US? These are just some examples, right? And this is obviously not an exhaustive list, and you're going to ask these questions differently, but we're really trying to get at these themes that you see listed here. Moving on to migration journey and arrival. So in that progression right now, we explore the experience of migration and arrival to what some call the host country, in this case, the US, right? We want to get an understanding of what were the means. Was it by plane, train, foot, flotation device? What distance did they traverse? Were they alone? Were they in a group? Interaction with various nations and laws and experiences, right? And also immigration pathways, as I explained earlier, depending on the country of origin and the circumstances, everybody's navigating a different immigration pathway. And so we want to be able to explore that. And sometimes, right, they're coming for employment. They can be family-based immigration pathways, employment-based, diversity lottery, refugee and asylum options as well. So we want to explore how those are applying to the person in front of you. So here are some examples of questions that you can ask that get at the migration and arrival. So what was your experience migrating to the US? You might want to ask, like, by what means did you get here? What countries did you traverse, and what was your experience at each of these countries with the people, humanitarian aid organizations, and their law enforcement agencies? Did you travel individually or in a group? For those who hold visas, what kind of visa do you hold or have held? What are the terms of your visa? And again, keep in mind, these are pretty sensitive questions that people may or may not want to answer. And as we said, we reinforce that they have the right to risk and right to pass when it comes to some of these questions that we're asking. And then who received you and your relatives, if they traveled with other folks, in the US. And if you want access to these questions, feel free to screenshot it or later send me an email, and I would be more than happy to share the list of questions. Post-migration. Here we obviously want to understand how the person is navigating their current environment. So language barriers, family disruptions and separations, culture shock, financial stressors, system navigation, professional experience, right? And I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with the cultural formulation interview. It's actually found in the DSM. I find that it's used very, very seldomly, but they have a supplemental list of questions when working with migrants and refugees. And that's where some of these questions are being sourced from. So questions might be, how has your life changed since coming here? What do you miss about the place or community that you come from? What are your concerns for your own family's future here? Again, sensitive question. Next one. What is your current status in this country? Right? It's like, are they a refugee claimant? Are they a citizen? Do they have a student visa, a work permit, DACA? Are they undocumented? This is a sensitive question and confidential for many individuals, especially, if they have a precarious status. So just be sensitive to that. Read the room. Let them know that they don't have to answer that question if they don't want to. But it can be really helpful because it might really help you understand what's at the root of some of their challenges. How has migration influenced your health or that of your family? Is there anything about your migration experience or current status in this country that has made a difference in right, for whatever reason they walked through your door? And the presenting problem is how the cultural formulation interview frames it. And is there anything about your migration experience or your current status that might influence your ability to get the right kind of help for your presenting problem? Just questions, right? These are definitely not questions that I was thinking about while I was going through my training, and and so I hope that they're helpful, at least in terms of themes, to help you come up with your own questions, which I know later you're going to have to translate if you're working with Spanish speakers or indigenous language speakers. Okay, let's talk about how to be with people when it comes to whether you want to call it healing practices, interventions. I want to give you a host of options. Today we're gonna start with somatic options here. In the practice setting, for folks that are comfortable with somatic practices, a couple things that I would suggest to you are connecting to an ancestor through rituals. Ask your client how they do that, and maybe bring it into the practice. You see two hands in here, and the grandmothers say that our hands are our first and most accessible medicine, because if you think about it, when you hit yourself, bump into something, stub your toe, which feels terrible, the first thing we do is we put our hand on top of it, right, to give it a little bit of comfort. And that's why the grandmothers and the abuelitas say that your hands are your first medicine. So we can do a lot with touch and with our hands in terms of creating comfort. If you're familiar with head holds are a really wonderful ancestral practice, which literally involves like holding parts of your head and applying gentle pressure as a support. The integration of or the use of rebosos. If you're familiar with rebosos or shawls, it can be a really wonderful somatic experience of comfort and embrace, right? It's like if you have your clients wrap it around themselves and squeeze a little, or however is comfortable for them, it can really facilitate emotional regulation and connection. Because for many of us, when we think about rebosos or shawls, we think about our elders. And so it can be a really wonderful opportunity to bring in that ancestral connection through an object and through a somatic exercise. Empacho, I can't see who's in the audience, but please raise your hand, not your digital hand, your actual hand, if you know about empacho massages. And although I can't see you, I just want to receive the energetic yes. And I've also heard the empacho massage be called a Mayan abdominal massage, and it involves it addresses also indigestion and abdominal tightness that is stress and anxiety related. So it involves going in circular motions through your abdomen to provide some relief and some movement, right? Which is what we're trying to bring in when our body goes into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flock mode. Bringing movement can come through that gentle massage. You see here a picture of two of my favorite items to have in my office, which is what we would, it's vapor rub, but we say vaporu in Spanish. And for the people who are more from Central and South America, maybe you're more familiar with Zepol. I think Zepol is just fantastic. It has a really strong smell of eucalyptus and all the delicious medicine, right? It's like it engages the olfactory sense and some nostalgia because many of us might associate it with someone who cared for us, right? Someone who, if we were sick, they rubbed it on our chest, they rubbed it on the soles of our feet or wherever else, right? Forehead, temples, etc. Other examples are humming, arrullos, singing, or chanting. And I want to quickly play you an example of a song that one of my maestros, one of my teachers, sings. And it's a beautiful song. Hopefully, it's in Spanish. So if you don't speak Spanish, I'm sorry that you won't be able to understand the lyrics. But if you do speak Spanish, listen to what it's calling in. It's basically putting an intention of like openness, and it's doing it through song, and it's like a call and response thing. And so I want to play this for you. I'm gonna need somebody to give me a thumbs up if you can actually hear it. So Jason, maybe can you come live on your video and give me the thumbs up if you can hear it? Do you hear it? Okay. Ábrete sentimiento,
Ábrete entendimiento.
ábrete,
Deja a un lado la razón
deja a un lado la razón
y deja brillar el sol. Y deja brillar el sol escondido en tu interior, escondido en tu interior. Mm.
And I'm looking at the time. I wish I could play you the entire thing, but I can't. Just to give you an example, right, of like how humming, arrullos, singing, chanting can really be brought into the space as a culturally connecting experience, as well as like a regulating experience. You also see here a bundle of plants that can be used for limpias, barridas, or tapping. It's literally like a somatic like exercise where you're just like sweeping, right? It's like you're moving the energy. It's movement. You're kind of getting the gist here, right? That it's really about movement, bringing movement when people go into trauma response mode or into survival mode, and really connecting it to ancestral practices. And we can talk more about that another time. For the folks maybe that are more comfortable in the cognitive space, I want to present to you, you know, a way to bring in dichos, which are proverbs or expressions to support cognitive restructuring and resilience. And these are some examples from Dr. Mercado and colleagues. And I'll give you a second to read these. They're both in English and Spanish, so check them out. And maybe you don't get a chance to read all of them, right? But just so you see how we can use some of these dichos or proverbs, and how they translate, how they map onto a CBT approach, right? Whether that is to help promote behavioral activation practices, explore avoidance behaviors, restructure and how we view an event or life itself, um, cognitive errors that might contribute to maladaptive behaviors, others that can be used to reinforce, to continue practicing therapeutic strategies, right? Is like this one about caveando se aprende a andar, like by failing, we learn to walk. It's just like this idea of using that to really reinforce, like, this is part of the process. Like, let's continue practicing these kind of things. And so just to give you some examples, if you're more comfortable, right, in like the cognitive, rather than if you're not so comfortable in the somatic practices, maybe a way to bring it into other cognitive approaches. Oop, went too far. Okay, in terms of addressing families, so family conversations, our knowledge of protective factors for immigrant communities highlight the importance of relationships and connection to culture and language. Those are resiliency factors, those are protective factors. So in cases of working with an adult, a caregiver, or families, encouraging caregivers to have conversations with their children during dinner. I think it really goes a long way with promoting the reestablishment of what, some attachment experts call like the send and return rhythm for positive attachment. It's like you say something to your parent says something in return that feels like they heard you and it was validating. Because the systemic issues faced by immigrant communities can create ruptures in relationships, right? It's like then your family's too busy to sit down and have dinner with you. So whenever possible, help caregivers find ways to connect their children and their with their children and with their support system to foster secure attachments. Those are going to be huge resiliency factors. It's in line with that, encouraging parents to practice ethnic and racial socialization. We actually find that having parents talk to their children about discrimination is a buffer, right? Many children these days are living in the fear of their parents, not just children, but their family members being arrested, deported. And so talking with them about all of those possibilities is actually setting them up to navigate difficult situations in a better way than if we kept them in the dark about those kind of things. And so encouraging parents to have those really difficult conversations. And maybe if you're working with the caregiver, you're practicing in those sessions, helping families how to have those conversations with their children or their adult relatives, to encourage having difficult conversations between family members, bringing that into the clinical space, or doing it in community-based approaches. We're almost there, Jason. And then lastly, engaging community resources. Do not underestimate the medicine of attending a protest, of chanting. So sometimes there might be moments when when we want to recommend to our clients is that they become politically engaged when it's safe, right? Um, we might want to encourage them to connect with faith-based organizations. In this particular community, we find that people first favor informal, some call them informal sources of support, and those include faith-based organizations. And we want to also tap into school-based supports. That's been a really great place for our families to be able to access support. If you know your local curanderas and curanderos, maybe you want to refer to them. Maybe someone needs a good limpia, and encouraging people to find who their medicine people are in community. That's an important part of those holistic wraparound services. And here you see a picture of something that looks like a half moon. In the Mesoamerican tradition, we have something called a temazcal, which is it's our sweat. And maybe someone needs a good temazcal, and there are some temazcaleras and temazcaleros here in Salt Lake City, and you might want to encourage them to access that kind of medicine at the community level. So, in sum, while this presentation is obviously not focused solely on the intergenerational effects of migration, it's essential to remember that migration is a human phenomenon and that has been significantly impacted by policy. Those effects are felt by immigrants and their descendants whom you may work with one day or who you're working with now. And I hope that we can have follow-up conversations about how migration and immigration policy impact attachment and environment across the lifespan and generations, as well as to find ways to leverage this knowledge to better serve people beyond harm reduction and toward transformational ways. So here are my humble suggestions to you in light of today's presentation, or La Moraleja. Be thorough. Again, a reminder, be thorough when discussing consent. Critical, right? To creating safety for people to be able to share their lived experiences with you. Adapt your biopsychosocial spiritual assessment tools to explore impact of migration and immigration. You have some examples here of questions that you can ask. Just pop them in. Build the somatic medicine kit. I gave you some examples of things that I integrate and how they connect to as grounding experiences and that are culturally aligned. Encourage family and community engagement outside of the clinical setting. We can't have people solely rely on us for the 1 hour a week that we see them, if that's how much we see them. We want them to access and tap into the medicine of the collective as well. And lastly, here's my closing remark. And I'm going to quote my dear friend, Gavin Cetrola Sanchez. Gavin, if you're in the audience, thank you so much for the things you've taught me. And they said, it's not enough to teach people how to suffer with grace. We must change the systems that make people suffer. So my call to you is to do our part in making sure that we change the systems that are making our clients suffer. And with that, I open it up for questions. And I'm sorry that I only left y'all 5 minutes for questions. It was a lot of content. So
No,
questions.
thank you so much, Professor Maro Coronado, for your powerful and insightful presentation. Yvette, I got to tell you, took me back to the late 1970s and 80s when my grandmother, would utilize some of those somatic approaches. And I'm like,
Good.
Grandma, what are you doing? Like, that so stinks and get it off me. And but she had her reasons. So
Yeah.
again, I just want to thank you for your outstanding presentation. Certainly members of the audience, we've got a few minutes. So I know we've got a number of questions, in the Q&A session. So Professor Romero Coronado, the time and the screen, it's yours.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to look at the Q&A box. The first one says, I work with court criminal justice involved population. My Latinx clients are reassured that my space is safe, although I cannot reassure them that their case won't affect their status. Any suggestions on how to approach their fears around this? Keep it real. Part of how we can't, sadly, right, because we're navigating the systems that we're navigating, we can't guarantee them protection and safety. What we can do is be transparent about what we're doing with the information that they're giving us and how it could potentially impact them. So I wish there was a different answer that I could give you, and that is the first thing that comes to mind, is just keep it real and be transparent about what's going to happen with the information that you gather. Jessica, do you suggest we ask them to bring their own shawls? Yes, absolutely. I bring my own because it just, right, sometimes I have my abuelita's shawl or someone else's shawl and it means something to me. If they don't have one, then maybe have one on site. Elizabeth, how do you suggest we help those whose family members are in their home country to maintain and develop a connection with them? Excellent question. Excellent question. The nice thing about technology these days and the fact that a lot people in our community tend to use WhatsApp. If you're familiar with WhatsApp, it's a texting app, and we can also now do video calls. I would definitely suggest encouraging those kind of connections. We actually find that it supports resilience and and it establishes those secure attachments even at a distance. So WhatsApp, whatever means they have to connect with the folks in their home country, definitely encourage them to do that and find out how they can. Um, okay, I think I've answered the questions in the Q&A. Okay. Now I'm gonna look at the comments to see if maybe we. Oh yes, Lindsay, thank you for saying pointing out the al mal tiempo buena cara. That's a very common dicho. and the translation. I appreciate you for doing that. A shout out to Gavin. Great. Oh, thank you all for your kind words. I think we've captured all the questions. So I think I think we're good.
All right. Just once again, thank you for your presentation, Professor Romero Coronado. Your work reminds us how essential it is to center culture, history, and lived experience in behavioral health care, especially for immigrant and Latine communities. The migration-centered framework and healing practices you've shared today offer clinicians meaningful tools to better serve their clients and communities. And, to everyone who joined us today, thank you, thank you, thank you. For those seeking continuing education credit, this session has been approved for one CEU. You'll receive an email in the next day or two with links to the recording and CEU quiz. You can also find those on our events page. Once you've successfully completed the quiz, your CEU documentation will be emailed to you automatically. On behalf of Dean Philip Osteen, we hope you'll join us at future Beyond the Classroom events. You can find details at socialwork.utah.edu/events. Until then, thank you again for being with us. Take care.